time to go through this morning's papers. Vincent Moss, former political editor at the Sunday Mirror, joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Right, shall we crack on? So the Telegraph, page 1.
Yes, the Telegraph's main story is the Met Police are warning that these strikes that are proposed, including the nurses' strike, not just the nurses, those civil servants, border force, lots of other people threatening strike action, saying the strikes will hurt the war on crime, because what Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, is saying is that a lot of police time now is spent dealing with mental health episodes and crises, both on the streets and in A&E wards. And if the nurses strike, this will put an increasing burden on the police, who are already doing a lot of this work. And that's a huge problem. The police are already overstretched. He says he needs 27% on his budget just to sort of stand still. And on top of that, dealing with the impact of other public sector workers striking will really hit the war on crime. I think that's very worrying.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've seen that a lot in hospitals, police mopping up everything, all those social problems. No one really knows who else to call, so you call the police.
Absolutely, and it is mental health problems that they're dealing with all of the time. I mean, I've done a lot of psychiatry work, and you see the police bringing people in every night, and it needs 6 of them to do it, you know, and I do feel sorry for the police in this way, because that's not what they went into policing for. I did kind of chuckle a little bit on that headline, because has there been a war on crime?
Yes, yeah, that's the other thing. Well, you could say it's an excuse, isn't there, because there's a police under a lot of criticism for not doing enough, particularly on burglary and those sort of crimes. But, you know, one of the reasons he is saying in an article he's written for the Telegraph, Sir Mark Rowley, is because they are so busy doing paperwork and dealing with things that, frankly, they think aren't their jobs, such as dealing with
I read that this morning, actually, and I thought the other thing that really stood out for me was the fact they can't strike because they're Crown servants. And, of course, they're feeling annoyed because they want that kind of uplift in their salary, and, of course, they feel their pay and conditions aren't good enough. They're seeing nurses saying, we want 17.6%. And, of course, that's not actually going down well with the other emergency services like the police.
Well, that's right. And I don't often have sympathy for the government and the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who's got these difficult decisions to make next week. But once you give somebody a hugely inflation-busting pay rise, then why have the firefighters or the police got less of a case, you would argue, than the nurses? And then where does that leave border force and all sorts of other people? So it's a huge problem, because who deserves a bigger pay rise than somebody else? Everybody's got a good case, I'm sure, for a pay rise, but that just means other people will inflate their demands.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And if you extrapolate it, I think looking at the headline that I had earlier in the week, 2 million workers set to strike. I mean, so Renee's point is really valid. If you then say, right, we're going to give you 17.6%, that would go across all of the public sector. Totally unaffordable. Who will pick that bill up? It will be hard-working people again, who are already being punished.
It will be hard-working people, but what will happen is services will actually get less. And I fear in the NHS, when they're given pay rises, they've actually said to the NHS, we're not giving you any extra money, take it out of your budget. So what happens? Services suffer, and the same will happen across the board. And you're right, where does it stop? I think I agree with your tweet that you just read out, that this is actually political activism at work, trying to bring down a government and doing a pretty good job, I think.
I mean, you said to me, in terms of the Twitter, I had a bit of a Twitter pile-on, because I just said I wasn't sure that the public had the sympathy with the nurses that the RCN think they have, and I got absolutely slated on Twitter. But, you know, again, you're talking to an echo chamber, aren't you? And you're talking to a particular
and it depends who picks up the tweet and where they distribute it to and who comes in on their behalf. You know, you have to learn to walk away.
I mean, it's so interesting. So in terms of the police, what's behind this? Is this essentially the police saying to the nurses, please don't strike?
Well, I think the Telegraph was sort of interpreted in way saying don't do that. I don't think that's the thrust of the article. The article's about the new Met Police chief mapping out what he needs. But of course, one of the problems with giving people big pay rises is that one of the big issues is really recruitment and getting extra staff and more police, more nurses. Now, if you're using that, spending that on existing staffing budgets, that really cuts down your room to get in the extra people that are needed in so many public sector roles. So it is a big problem. Now, I do think one of the problems with the nurses issue is that they will get probably, one would hope, a good pay rise. They certainly deserve it. But it's when people hear the higher numbers, they think, wow, I'm not going to get that, and that really is too much. Now, in reality, let's see where everybody ends up. But I think even if inflation's running at 10%, so even if people get 8 or 9 or 7%, which sounds a lot in normal times, that's still really a real terms pay cut. Makes it very difficult for people.
So what do you think the government will do? Will it actually sit on this and wait for inflation to fall? Because that's what they're hoping, isn't it? That inflation will come down. We think we've reached the peak of that. If inflation then drops in half, then obviously that pay deal looks better.
Yes, I think that's what they've got to hope for, isn't it? Is part of the narrative of the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's speech next week will be, I think think I've got inflation under control. We hope it's peaked. Things are going to get down. Fuel prices are going to come down. Things are going to get better. Therefore, you don't need a massive pay rise. I mean, that's the only hope he's got, really.
And just one interesting point that you just made, Vincent, was the other problem they have in the police with recruitment is they've made police training degree only. Again, excluding a vast number of people who would make excellent police officers.
Yeah, I heard that from a friend of mine who's a police officer, and he just said it's such a nonsense. And again, why are we doing this? Why are we obsessed with degrees?
It's an obsession, and it almost just denigrates anyone else who doesn't have one.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's move on now, if we can, to the Express, page 5. This is a very interesting story. I wonder how much of it is true.
Well, I do feel I come here occasionally and every week say there's a new deal about dealing with migrant crossings between France and Britain, but this one looks as though it might actually be happening in terms of there's certainly a better attitude, it seems, between the new British Prime Minister and Macron in terms of getting things done, and James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, is in talks with his counterpart, the French Minister for Europe, Catherine Colonna, and they are now talking about an ambitious package to get things. A deal could be agreed as soon as Monday. This would see British staff not running things but going over to France, working with the French, and just to try and stop a great number of the crossings actually happening. If it works, great, but who knows?
So according to this, we would pay £60 million for this. So you would have more gendarmes and volunteer officers on the beaches. They want to essentially stop the numbers leaving. Now, I think they stopped 29,000, which is about 42%. So they're obviously, the idea being that if they actually can stop 80% of them, then you make the economic case unviable. So therefore it would stop the people trafficking them across. But essentially, the most extraordinary thing for me about this is the idea that they've been saying, no, we're not having British people on our soil. And now they're saying, actually, we will have joint control centres. That's a big change.
It is, and if that happens, that's really important because British intelligence and the British know-how, if you like, I'm sure might improve getting that number towards the 70 or 80% target of stopping crossings that they need to get to. I mean, the big worry the French always had was a lack of sovereignty because they don't want the idea that since we've left the EU, the idea that somehow Britain may be in control. So it's a question of some of the language around it, but in principle, if you get sort of British minds and British skill sets on the ground in France, you would have thought that the chance of stopping illegal crossings would be higher, and that can only be a good thing, both for the safety of the people trying to get here, and then also in terms of the cost terms to the UK taxpayer and the huge amount of money it costs to deal with.
Yeah, and I read also this morning, I read that it was about the fact we have amazing intelligence, real-time intelligence that the French don't have, so we can feed it to them in those control centres, show them where the boats are, and intercept them, literally as they leave France.
Yeah, and if you think about it, we're paying £7 million a day to house migrants.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
So 60 million is 10 days of hotels in the UK. And if we can actually stop people coming, that's where it has to happen. Not processing people quicker or giving them other ways to come in. It's actually stopping them coming.
Yeah. So, Vincent, what's behind this politically? Why is there sort of a thawing of relationships, do you think, going on between the United Kingdom and France? Because it's been a tricky relationship.
It has. I think it's as simple as probably a new regime. I don't think the French had much time for Liz Truss. She made it clear she didn't much like the French, or certainly seemed to suggest that.
Are they friend or foe?
Yes,
It's a brilliant one.
Julie Hartley-Brewer has much to answer for with that interview.
I know, but honestly, what a great thing. Surely, even if you don't like them, you'd say, obviously, we're great
What a
friends.
brilliant coup to get Liz Truss to say that, though, although it obviously did much damage.
Yeah, I know.
It did, and I think the obviously relations are a lot more cordial now, and Rishi Sunak met Macron. That all seemed to go very well. It looked like a sort of budding bromance, and that presumably has led to this next stage, which is...
So politically, this is really interesting. If Rishi Sunak, and I will talk about the polls later on, but if Rishi Sunak does actually crack the migrant crisis, that will be a huge boost to the Conservative Party.
Well, that's right. I mean, it looks, doesn't it, in polling terms, that dealing with the migrant crisis, dealing with crime, and perhaps dealing with the NHS and the long wait times are three of the biggest things in his intro, and if he can deal with 2 or 3 out of those, then he'll have done
absolutely right. Well, we'll see whether that actually... So we think the deal is when? Tomorrow?
No, as early as Monday, potentially.
I was thinking it's Monday tomorrow. It's not Monday tomorrow.
You've still got to get up early tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. I have. You're right. Okay, let's move on to the Times now. The front page.
Yeah, fascinating story in the front of the Times. It says care homes are told to stop shutting loved ones out. Now, I didn't really know that this was going on. Remember the terrible times in COVID when this was happening. It appears that many care homes are still telling people they can't see their loved ones in care care homes for whatever reason. And Helen Watley, the care minister, is saying that shutting care homes showed a lack of humanity, and this must be stopped. And under plans being drawn up by the government, care homes and hospitals will be forced to allow visitors in to see their loved ones, which makes eminent sense. I didn't realise that this was happening, and sounds like a good thing that it won't be allowed to cause.
It's even still happening in the NHS.
I know it
We've
is.
experienced a few months ago with my father-in-law who was in hospital, and one visitor a day for an hour a day. It had to be the same person every single day, and they allocated the time. So my partner couldn't go and see his father because he's a working surgeon in London and couldn't make the trip at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for every single day.
For that 1 hour.
For that 1 hour,
Yeah.
so somebody else had to go. It's barbaric. We lost in the last 2.5 years this vision that humans need human interaction. We saw people with dementia deteriorate much quicker than they were because they weren't seeing people, familiar people. I even had somebody write to me and say that they were unable to take a book into a care home to read to their blind mother because the book might have COVID.
Oh, don't be ridiculous.
Honestly.
I mean, this is where it all went wrong. You mentioned something there, and it triggered a thought, which is, I also think we lost sight of the fact the NHS is there to serve us, to look after us and our families, and not the other way round.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read this story this morning. I actually tweeted it out because I thought at last somebody is acknowledging that we need to sort this out. Care homes now, if there's one case of COVID anywhere, they shut it down, they're sending staff home.
But why everyone is vaccinated?
Everybody is vaccinated. It is just lunacy.
It certainly seemed to be, and I'm glad that they're potentially giving residents this legal right to be able to go and visit people for exactly the reasons you sort of so eloquently outlined. Seems terrible, but they're saying that potentially as many as I think it's as many as 2% of all the care homes have still got some restrictions in place. I think official figures, the Times says, show that 2% of England's 15,000 care homes are almost entirely closed to visitors. In addition to that, surveys carried out showed that many others had still restrictions on visitors. Incredible.
I can't help feeling that we shouldn't need a change in the law to tell the caring industry to stop being barbaric and care.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, what's the point of living? If you're in a care home and you don't see anyone, there is no point in living. You might as well just, end it there. And that is the point. And we need to let relatives in.
It's the irony, isn't it? We are taking people's lives away to keep them alive. Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah, I know. I really hope that this changes, but I've seen it in hospitals as well, where they're still going on this mantra of COVID. The whole point is we've rolled out the vaccination. We had a very successful vaccination programme. We know the elderly and the vulnerable are protected. If you need more protection, yes, fine. But actually, for the vast majority of people, we have to get on with life.
Well, scarily, Wales, from Monday, have reintroduced mandatory mask wearing in all hospitals in one region to protect against normal winter respiratory viruses, not even COVID. So it seems like the door has been left ajar, and now, as we feared would happen, we're now implementing these kind of things, and I just say no. Say no.
But of course you have no right of redress if you go into that hospital. You have to do what they say. There is no way out of that.
Well, it says unless exempt. I suspect that people will walk in and say I'm exempt.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Okay, should we move to the Eye now? Page 5.
Yes, the I newspaper is covering what will be probably the story of the next few days, which is ahead of the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's budget on Thursday. What's he going to do? How is he going to fill this famous 60 billion black hole? And the line the Eye have taken is senior Conservative are urging him, don't go too far on tax raises. The speculation is he'll look for about 25 billion or 30 billion, half of the money in tax rises and the other half in cuts. The truth is we don't yet know. He's been saying it's all very grim and difficult, eye-watering decisions, which is sort of typical pitch rolling to make us realise how bleak things are, and maybe it won't be quite as bleak because a few things have turned, like some fuel prices have started to lower, and there are other more positive signs about inflation might have peaked. So there are some positives, but this will be the story of the Sunday papers in the next few days. What is Jeremy Hunt going to do to fill this massive black hole?
So it appears he will freeze the tax bands until 2028. That, of course, means with fiscal drag, so many more people get dragged into those higher rates. So it's thought that 40% rate, the numbers going into that will double as a result of that, which is an extraordinary figure. So essentially saying we're not putting up taxes, but actually you are because of the numbers that are being dragged in. But also they're going to, I think, we believe, stop any more spending. So all departmental spending will stay at 2021 levels. Now that's interesting for lots of reasons. Firstly, because it breaks a number of pledges in the 2019 manifesto, and I wonder how they'll get through that.
It's very difficult, isn't it? I think I don't know how they're talking about defence spending not going up as high as it was meant to go up. But I think the real one, it's good that you highlight, I think, the tax bands thing, because it's not seen as a tax hike by many people out there, but it is in real terms, because if you're not inflating the tax thresholds, it is a tax hike. Of course, and it's a sort of stealth tax, really.
Yes, and of course it's easy for the government because it's an easy win. They don't have to do anything, but just watch everyone get dragged into that. The one that I think is really interesting, if you remember in 2019, they promised that we would then, in terms of our defence budget, actually spend 3% of our GDP. Now, the NATO target is 2%. I think we'll be lucky to be at 2%, actually.
Yeah, and what I think is really interesting about this is that when Rishi said that he wouldn't commit to fracking anymore, he made that U-turn on what Liz Truss had said. He said it was because his mandate was the manifesto.
Correct.
Well, if his mandate is the manifesto, how is he going to do this?
That's right, it's one of the big challenges, because he does use that phrase a lot, that he's living up to the 2019 manifesto, and people will be watching for anything that deviates too far.
So here's the other thing politically, which I really struggle with. If you have a manifesto and you don't keep to it, what is the point of having a manifesto?
It's a challenge. I think the one argument that you can always make, you can say, well, we weren't expecting COVID, we weren't expecting to be supporting efforts to defeat Putin in Ukraine, so you can say things have changed massively since 2019. Normally, I don't have much truck for that, but I think COVID and
no, I understand that.
Quite big
but
events.
Then the pitch for the leadership was all about sticking to the 2019 manifesto, and that was blatantly a lie. Really, wasn't it? They can't. There's no way, and I agree with that. If they said, actually, it's about Ukraine, it's about the fact that the world has changed and COVID, fine. I think most people would understand that. But don't keep saying you're sticking to a manifesto pledge in 2019 and then basically change all the rules and rip up your manifesto. It does nothing for people's trust in politics.
Well, I think that's gone, though, hasn't it? Do you think there's anyone out there who has trust in politics anymore?
Well, we need to get it back. Because you cannot have that disconnect between the people who vote for politicians and the politicians themselves.
So the way to do that is stop breaking
manifesto pledges. That's really where I'm going with that, yeah. Can you tell I've got to be in my bonnet this morning about that? Right, okay, the Sun.
Right, last one from the Sun, something a little bit lighter, and I apologise for really having breakfast, but it's I'm a Celebrity and Matt Hancock again. With those of a sensitive disposition, maybe sort of look away or turn down the volume a little bit, because there's a picture of him on the front page of the Sun eating a camel's penis, and there are more graphic details inside. I mean, obviously this is always going to happen. He was always going to get the Bush Tucker trials, and he seems to be chomping his way through cow's anuses and fisheye tacos and all the rest of it, and the camp dwellers are loving it.
Tacos.
Yeah, all sorts of weird stuff.
That's the most appealing thing on that list.
I think I'll have the fish on tacos.
Absolutely. Why do people watch this rubbish?
I don't know. I haven't watched it. I can't watch it. I mean, I literally haven't. Have you watched it, Vincent?
I've only seen the clips, but the one thing that fascinates me by it are a lot of people are watching it, and I think Matt Hancock hoped it would rehabilitate him. That doesn't seem to be happening.
Good.
The camp people seem to be very, very angry with him.
What do you really think?
And I think the general public are still pretty unhappy with him. Now, we've seen people who are very unpopular politicians do these sort of shows and become more popular. Ed Balls famously did Strictly Come Dancing, and he seems to be an awful lot more popular now. Whether that will happen for Matt Hancock, I think he's got a long way to go.
No, I can't cope
Look
with
at that headline we're looking at in the Sun now. Hancock camel scoff hump.
But is this not what's wrong with the world? I mean, if you think of all the problems that we have in the world at the moment and in our country, and that's the front page
But you
of
see,
one of our biggest newspapers.
but there's a really serious point here. He was Secretary of State for Health. He was the one that actually discharged people into care homes without testing them for COVID.
And
he's the reason people die.
Yes, and he let them do this. He let them put these rules in that have denied people their basic humanity. He has so much to answer for. You know how angry I am about him.
I know you are.
I'm so
He's
angry
also still a paid public servant and still an
Exactly.
MP. That's a big problem next week when people are voting on cost of living issues, and he will be in Australia
And
earning his
that's the
fee.
point. He's paid £84,000 to represent those people in West Suffolk. Where is he? He's in the jungle. He should be in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Shouldn't he?
I'm sure that's exactly what his constituents probably thinking. It may be, if he wants to begin an MP again in 2 years' time when there's an election, I imagine that'll be his
I
strategy.
don't think he does either. And in Haverhill, which is the biggest town, I think, in that constituency, they want him out. And so, obviously, there's this big backlash going on in Suffolk.
Good.
And quite rightly.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I hope they trigger a by-election. I don't care if the Tories lose it. I hope they do. He deserves it. The other thing I want to say here is the clip I saw yesterday of him saying that he fell in love, excusing his behaviour. His poor children his poor
And
children.
he broke the law.
Yeah, but his poor children will always have to watch that. When they're at school, someone will go, oh, here's your dad, he fell in love with someone else. It's horrible.
It is really. Renee, back in your box. Thank you very much. Vincent, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much
Absolutely.
indeed
Thank
for
you.
coming in. After the break, Tom Clayton will be with us to tell us all the latest sport headlines. This is Talk TV. We're broadcasting live from the Talk Radio studios.